left unsaid. Days that can't be counted by the time till rent. Tomorrow's just another like the one that comes next. The corner of the highway that leads to the job at the desk by the boss with the elegant watch. The tick of the clock and the tick of the clock mark the moments till the ticking stops.
We welcome Daniel Coyle back to the podcast. Dan is the New York Times bestselling author of The Culture Code and many other books. He has advised many high-performing organizations, including the Navy SEALs, Google, and the Cleveland Guardians. He has a new book. It's called Flourish, The Art of Building Meaning, Joy, and Fulfillment. You're going to enjoy the pod. Dan Coyle, welcome back to the podcast.
Thanks for having me, Kelly. Nice to be here.
I really like this book. This feels like your most personal book in many ways because there's a personal journey.
Yeah.
You start in the prologue, you talk about this note that is a quote from Barry Schwartz that you couldn't shake, so you wrote and taped it above your desk. Yeah. I usually have a quote like taped above, like it's behind me on my corkboard, and I realized the one I have is, it just says true but useless, which feels not nearly as inspirational.
Yeah, right.
Just when someone said that and they were doing that, they said something was TBU, and I remember I was saying, "What's that?" And they're like, "Oh, true but useless." I'm
That's
like,
really good.
I like that.
That is true, actually. That's true and useful, really.
Yeah. So, talk about the one that's above your desk and why it's there.
Yeah. No, it's the reason it was there is when I was about 55, I lost both my mom and dad in kind of short succession, unexpectedly, and just really, I mean, we know that's going to happen to most of us in the world. All of us in the world will go through that, but it knocks you to the ground, and I felt knocked to the ground. And during that time, I came across this quote from Barry Schwartz, a psychologist, that said, "Most people think life is a treasure hunt. They are mistaken. It's actually a treasure creation." And so that distinction just really resonated with me because I had been going through as a writer, as somebody always going after the next project. I was pretty good hunter, but I didn't know how good of a creator I was. And so it just kind of sent me on this journey. I've spent, as you mentioned in the intro, like I've spent a lot of time with super high performers, right? And people who climb the mountain and get to the top of the mountain. And I've seen that when you get to the top of the mountain, a lot of times there's just more mountain, right? Mm-hmm. Just another thing to climb, another thing to hunt. And what that got me interested in was like, where are the valleys? Like what's going on in those green valleys where there's a lot of generativity, where there's a lot of life, where there's connection, where there's meaning beyond success, deeper than success. And so that's got me interested in Flourish, which is, it's just basically, about meaningful, joyful growth that you share. Like that's what flourishing is. And so it sent me on a trip to visit these places that are good at doing it and figure out what they have in common.
I think this is where metaphors play a more important part, both sometimes positively, but often negatively. Mm-hmm. And the ladder is one of those metaphors. This like, mm-hmm. Oh, you're climbing the ladder. And it's like, yeah, the problem with that is what happens when you get to the top, because there's only one place to go, and that's down.
Exactly right. And we see that in our culture. Like even the word success, I don't think it quite feels the same as it did a few years ago. And I think the thing that we're realizing is there is this hollowness at the center of a lot of success. And what we really are trying to create in our communities, I think, is something that's not like a machine or a ladder. It's an ecosystem. And every ecosystem, they're not random. They function according to rules, right? They're interdependent connection. There's places of growth. There are places of meaning. And so seeing that that's not just an accident, like when we, if we were to close our eyes and think about the most like deeply meaningful, flourishing parts of our lives, we would all have things that we think of, right? But we often think those experiences are just magic. Like, oh, that was just summer camp when I was in 8th grade, or, oh, that was just, my first job when I got out of college and it was really magical there in Chicago, or that was just that improv troupe I worked with or whatever. And it's like, well, wait a minute, let's look at those. Is that really magic? Or is there like a machinery underneath there that we can align with and we can attune to tap into it today? Because despite all the sort of dark stories that are out there in the world, the hopeful part of the book and the hopeful part of the journey was like, you know what? When you really look around, there's some people out there that are really creating a lot of meaningful, joyful growth.
It's interesting. Before we hopped on recording this, I was telling you I'm working on the new book, and I'd written the opening chapter, and a lot of this is because I'm one of our authors is not an improv guy, so it's my wife Ann and I. Been in Second City forever, and often it's us telling stories and then him sort of going, "Oh, that ties to this" or whatever. And I was talking about the work we've done with the FBI, with the hostage negotiation crisis unit, and my opening story, he's like, "You literally have." An opening story that has bullets flying, that has all like you the sound of gunfire is constant when you're at Quantico, right? And you're trying to teach improv and stuff. So he's like, those stakes are high. Chapter one, you have a very high stakes story,
Yeah.
which
Yeah.
and it's lovely. And for the audience, remind them of what happened in Chile in 2010 in the San Jose mine, because if you were alive in 2010, you know the story.
It was one of the biggest stories in the world, right? At the time, we were all riveted by it because a chunk of mountain fell in and trapped 33 miners down about 1,200 feet. And so they were down there for, I think, 55 days. And for 16 days without any word from, no one knew if they were alive or dead. And so when they were removed, the story was, oh, yay, we got them out. That was great. But what the question that fascinated me was like, what happened during those 16 days where it was total darkness? They didn't know if they were going to live or die. How did they come together and survive? And it turns out, the stories that came out afterwards were sort of all about the leadership of this one or two miners. When they actually interviewed the miners, though, a really different story came out. And that's the story I tell in the book, which is there were some key moments during that time early on where they realized we're here. Nobody's possibly coming and get us. This could be it. We're in the dark. We're 1,200 feet from oxygen. We've got a little bit to eat, a tiny bit to drink. And they circled up and they had these little short rituals. They were really small rituals that talked where they sort of surrendered to each other, really, where they said there's no leaders and there's no followers. The leader took off his white helmet and said there's no leaders, there's no followers, there's only us. And they began to take care of each other. And in those moments of ritual, we sort of talk about them as if they're magic. But what happens in any moment like that is really our attention shifts. We stop looking at the world as something we can control, and we start looking at the world as something we're connecting with. And the rhythm of those pauses, circling up and stopping together and sort of asking the question, what matters now, is such a primal moment. And as I looked around at these other flourishing places, what I found was they were all having some version of those moments where you are stopping in a ritual-like way and making meaning together. Like, meaning is the most important thing of life, right? Meaningful relationships are the most important thing. And they don't happen accidentally. They happen in these pauses where we circle up and we ask, what matters right now? Why are we here? What are we connected to that's bigger than ourselves? And in those moments, that's what allows people to drop their defenses and start cooperating and collaborating in ways that show care and ways that help the group to survive. So in this case, in the miners, they developed these rituals where they cared for each other, where they had a ritual at each meal. Even though they were eating just a tiny spoonful of canned tuna, they turned that into like this little sacred space. And because of that, when they finally were removed, each miner would say to the others, no, you go first. You get in the elevator first, right? That sense of camaraderie and deep connection wasn't magic. It was something that they built. It was something they built together by saying, we're gonna drop our armor, we're gonna circle up, and we're gonna explore this mystery of why we're here.
Of course, this drew me into all the improv stuff, because what a lot of people don't know is the most rigorous science that has been done on improvisation, and Carl Weick did a lot of it, is improvisation in high stakes situations, like after a disaster on an aircraft carrier, that sort of thing. So what are the philosophy? It's all of us are more important than one of us. It's you play the scene you're in, not the scene you want to be in. You see all obstacles as gifts. I mean, it is a orientation, it's a mindset. And the fact that, isn't it, when they finally were coming out, they were singing the national anthem?
That's right.
That's a higher, that's, for some people that would be a religion or a nation or whatever, but it's something more important than any of us individually.
That's right. And we tend to look at these moments as through this lens of like spirituality. There's a lot of words we use to describe these things, right? It was a spiritual moment. It was a, it was a magical moment. But in fact, when you look at the machinery beneath it, I think it's our kind of our modern minds that have it reversed, right? We walk around always with this narrow focus and this idea that we have to go from 1 to 2 to 3 to 4, and that each person is kind of an island. And actually, when you sort of take the moment and hold on, let's open up our attention. And connect it. And what becomes really fascinating is when you realize, when you look at all these places, there's some really interesting, brain functions and systems. The way our attention systems are built is to create this. So this isn't like something that we're not good at doing. It's something we're all good at doing. We just have to create the conditions that we can do it in.
At a certain point after I read this next thing I want to talk to you about, which takes place at Zingerman's in Ann Arbor, I was like, we could have the entire podcast about this. So you're visiting Ari Weinswag, am I pronouncing that correctly?
Yep.
Yeah. Who's the co-founder of Zingerman's. Many of you will know that, in Ann Arbor. And you asked him if it felt surreal starting out as a dishwasher, which is how I started here, when he oversaw a small empire, and he said, all life is surreal. But then he stopped for a moment and said to you, little Danny Coyle, growing up in Alaska, wanting to be a writer.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I mean, that's not fair.
No.
I mean,
no.
But also brilliant.
Brilliant. This is what he does. And this is what good leaders do of flourishing places. They're constantly doing like the Chilean miner circle up, right? He could have answered my question. I'm like, is it weird being, dishwasher to this? And most people would have said, yes, it is weird. Now I'm a CEO. They would have answered the question. But flourishing people and places are always looking to redirect your attention outward. And he knew enough about my story because he had asked, where'd you come from?
Yeah.
Where'd you grow up? How'd you want to be a writer? You grew up in Alaska. You want to be a writer? That when I asked the question about his background, he simply did a mirror back to me. He said, you were a little kid growing up in Alaska. You wanted to be a writer. How surreal is that? And he's so good at doing that. And it's so beautiful because that showed me that leadership is not about providing answers. It's about illuminating questions, embedding questions in the landscape that people can then kind of self-organize around. He did another beautiful job of that. There was a time where I was asking him, so why didn't you, now Zingerman's, just for a quick backstory, started off as this tiny deli, right? And they grew and grew. They're now a $90 million community of businesses. They have a dairy, they have a bakery, they have a restaurant, they have a travel business. And they've grown and grown, and they've always stayed rooted in Ann Arbor. That's their community. That's their value. And they got an offer from Walt Disney to come into Walt Disney, $50 million. We want you to be in our parks. And they said, no, thanks. We're all about Ann Arbor. And then they said, well, if Walt Disney ever opens in Ann Arbor, we'll go there. that was what Art said. So most people say $50 million. Why'd you turn that down? So I asked Ari that question. I said, how did you turn down Disney? Why did you turn them down? $50 million. And he points to my wedding ring and he goes, do you take every opportunity that comes along? Like, okay, right. He's illuminating that commitment is where the good stuff is. He's illuminating that depth and commitment is the real value here. And so I think, over and over again, I would have these same sort of encounters with leaders of these places where they'd find a way to reframe, and always a zoom out. It wasn't ever a zoom in. It's always a zoom out to say, wait a minute, there's something big and beautiful we're a part of here together right now, and connect to that, resonate with that. And the feeling that happens in those moments is not logic or information or analysis. It's like the feeling of presence. It's like a feeling of being around something that matters. And that's what those guys had in the Chilean mine. That's what the Zingerman's whole culture is really good at creating, these moments of presence where we can say, this has value. Just my experience with it, this feeling I have, this connection I have has value. Probably not unlike people watching a great improv show. They're not analyzing their way through it. They're saying this is meaningful.
Okay, so we should probably talk about Peter Block.
Yeah. Yep.
That this entire section is in bold. Like after I read that. So
yeah.
He's the author of Community, The Structure of Belonging, Confronting Our Freedom. This sounds like a game changer of a human being.
He's unbelievable. He's been around. He's 80 now, and he started the team building movement. The word team building may not have existed before Peter Block came along.
Wow.
with governments. He's worked with huge organizations, and he's worked mostly in the last 20 years or so with communities and neighborhoods in his adopted hometown of Cincinnati. But he's like a philosopher king, and he's just really, really good at creating these moments of meaning and presence, especially in small groups.
There's a line that he gave. You talk about he's happy to have people leave a session if they're not into it for any reason.
Mm-hmm.
And the line he says, "If you can't say no, your yes is worthless."
Isn't that the truth? Right?
Wow. I read that out loud to my wife, and she's like, "That is a very, very profound idea."
It's true. It's so true. And when we're in these situations, especially when he's bringing people together to talk, and my favorite story about Peter, and of course, getting to know him has been kind of remarkable. When I first sent a note to him, he invited me down to Cincinnati and invited me to stay in his apartment. He just, this is the way he goes through life with the community. And one time in his neighborhood, there was a shooting, and I think I tell the story in the book, but the neighborhood gathered because they were worried about the shooting, and they expected to get kind of a reassuring message from the authorities about the plan that they were going to do. Instead, Peter stood up, and he asked them to get into groups of 3 with people they know the least. And then he asked them a question, which was, when did you first start to care about this neighborhood? Just a completely different stance, right? He's not asking for information. He's asking about the relationship and wanting them to explore the relationship. And so he embodies, I think, the craft of creating presence, the craft of creating meaning. He's like a meaning-making machine. And he really demonstrates that it is really not about providing answers. It is about creating space. We use that phrase a lot, right? Creating space. And we use it kind of as a sloppy metaphor. But what he does, and he's a no-nonsense guy. He's a no BS guy. He creates very firm boundaries, and he gives people an out. If you can't say yes, your no is, if you can't say no, your yes is meaningless. You can leave if you want. Choose to enter. Here's the question you're going to explore together. He gives them a question. He gives them a short amount of time, and he lets them do whatever they want. There's no coercion. There's no information. And people start to talk. And what he has found, as he puts it, after a short time, people just kind of fall in love with each other.
I mean, you and I both work with corporate groups, I think in a fairly similar way. And I find, for the most part, these business people, these ideas resonate with them. That you don't need, maybe in 20 years ago you had to do this, but I don't need to do a lot of bridging for them to see how that would apply in their work.
That's right. And there's a moment of resistance usually, right? When you say, okay, I want you guys to turn and explore this deep question or get vulnerable for a minute. There's a moment of resistance where somebody goes, oh shit. Yeah. But then when they do it, when they actually say, okay, turn to the person next to you and talk about what they would need to know to be your best friend. Like, what would they need to know about you? Or talk about the last time you sang a song. Talk about that. Talk about just anything that gets to the center of who they are, to something meaningful, to something vulnerable. And what you find is you get this little moment of resistance, and then you can't shut them up. Like, you literally cannot bring them back because they're enjoying the conversation so much. And I think that's how we all are. And there's a guy, Nick Epley at University of Chicago, who's made a whole world out of this, right? I mean, I think you probably know his work, but
we actually worked with him, on that study.
Really? Oh, that's incredible.
Yeah, we not talked about this.
No.
So my audience knows this. This is Dan talks about Epley's study he did on public transportation in Chicago, having conversations with strangers. So when we were doing our work at the University of Chicago, Epley was one of our main guys. And he said to my wife, Ann, he's like, can you design an exercise that would allow people to experience the thing that they experienced in this study? So Ann created an exercise, and we teach it at Second City, called Universal Unique. So we pick a generic topic like grocery shopping, and we have people have a conversation about how human beings grocery shop, just at a, top level. And they do that. And then we say, okay, after about a minute or two, now you're going to have a conversation about how you personally grocery shop.
Yes.
And what we then, when we're debriefing, we're like, this is self-disclosure. and like, because the second conversation is so much richer, so much interesting. You're like, did you learn things? I learned a ton. Yeah, and you're talking about grocery shopping.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
when you put in the little details of those things, they reveal worlds of
Yes.
you and how you think, and and you open up, and suddenly what was a transaction became a relationship.
Yeah. Right. Right. I love that. It's so true. And it's about this moment of like intimacy and detail and
Mm-hmm.
bringing someone close and feeling confident enough to bring someone close like that. And it's all around these questions. And I think
Yeah.
doesn't it feel to you like we undervalue questions in this world?
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
we're so much about answers, and our phones are always delivering answers, and ChatGPT is all about answers. And it's like, I don't want any more answers. Like, I've got enough answers. And because when I went to visit these flourishing places, originally I thought I would find places that were all about like action and answers and certainty. And what I found that there were places that were really about pausing, and they were about kind of questions and kind of exploring
Mm-hmm.
uncertainty together, like stepping into uncertainty together. That's powerful, right? We don't know exactly what's going to happen, but if we move into it together, we can kind of shape it ourselves.
My co-author of Yes and Tom Yorton, when he worked here, he would do this so often in the middle of a meeting that we're having. He'd say, "Can I stop and ask this question? What problem are we trying to solve?"
Yeah.
Because we had moved so far past that, we were just like I don't even know what we're talking about now. Everyone's talking to be heard, or they've got
Yeah.
another idea or a parallel idea, and it's like, no, what, like, and that's all work is solving problems together
Yeah. That's it. That's
over
it.
and over and over again.
Yeah. And how much more fun is that with people you like and admire and know well? Like
That's right.
there's the joy of it. Yeah.
There's an experiment I did not know about, which is also what I love about your books, is it's not retracting a lot of stuff that you've already heard, but it's an experiment that Ellen Langer, the Harvard psychologist, ran in the
Mhm.
fall of 1979 when she turned an unused monastery into a kind of time machine.
Yeah. Yeah. No, incredible experiment. She is quite a revolutionary thinker. But yeah, she took a monastery and she put an ad out for people, older people who wanted to invest in this, and she redecorated the monastery to include everything from 20 years before. So instead of the color TV, it was a black and white, and instead of a radio, it was an old grandma, an old turntable, and all of the furniture, all of the magazines, all the music they heard, and they walked in, and it was as if they were being transported back to that time. And then she tracked the energy levels and health of the people who came in, the older gentlemen who were a part of this, and it happened to be all gentlemen who were a part of this. And what she observed over the 4 days of the experiment was this sort of very kind of quick, connective awakening of energy and meaning and delight and fun. And on the last day, one of her students had brought a football to throw around. And these old men, one of whom had a cane and one of whom had a limp, all of a sudden they're out there playing touch football together in a way that she said it wouldn't remind anybody of the NFL, but at the start of the experiment, nobody would have thought it was possible. And so this idea that the spaces that we're in conversation with, and the idea that these places of memory and resonance can bring us out of who we are right now and activate a different version of ourselves. Um, I think what she showed was the power of how that kind of awakening can happen, even with kind of people who would be unlikely to do that.
Do you know Leidy Klotz, who wrote the book Subtract? Are you familiar with his work?
No.
He's really interesting. So he's both a behavioral scientist and an engineer.
Mm-hmm.
And this is the subject of his next book.
Oh
And
yeah.
and it's about places and
Mm-hmm.
how we design these places. And like me, he lost a child. And we have a conversation that's in the book of, sort of designing these spaces. Like for me, it was like, where is Nora going to be? And she ended up that her school named a playground after her,
Mm.
and it's filled with it. And I drive by it often, and it's lovely to have children playing there.
Oh my gosh.
um, and that didn't quite work for him, and he was trying to figure out what to do in his case. And I've got to work up the energy, the emotional, sort of to read this whole thing. But it's the idea that, and you talk about this in the book over and over again, the intentional design of conversations, the
Yeah.
intentional design of spaces. And I do think it's that loss that you experienced, the loss that I experienced, the loss that Lydia experienced, that kicks you in the face to
Mhm.
say, you haven't been doing it right.
Yeah. Right.
And there are better ways to do this. And and for me, it's also like, thank God I found it. I hate the way I got here,
Mhm.
but also it is such, I don't know if you've experienced this, and because I have incorporated a lot of this stuff into my life. It's a better life.
Yeah. Right.
I
Right.
More friends, more meaningful conversations. I now, for health reasons, I take a walk after lunch every day, and I take it often in the Gold Coast in Chicago, and it's like that area. It's so
Yeah.
pretty,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
it's just
Right.
right near me. Yeah,
Right. Right. This idea that we can kind of click into a different mode whenever we want to and sense meaning. There's a lot of, we
yeah.
know about how awe works, and we know a lot about how wonder works, and all of them are kind of the same move. What's
They
interesting
are
is a
kind of the
lot of
same move.
it's like the same move. And that move really is surrender, right?
Mhm.
Surrender control. You're walking on the Gold Coast. You're looking at the sunrise. You're not trying to do anything, right? You're not looking at the world through some narrow lens. You're sort of surrendering and opening up to the sides and the top and the bottom of your vision. And then you're kind of sensing something, right? You're like sensing something out there that's not you. Some philosophers would call this unselfing, or you're
Mhm.
sort of disappearing, right? You're sensing them, and then you're sensing some like resonance with it. You're in communication with something bigger than yourself, and it's always the same move. I was at a sort of a parenting conference thing recently, and they talked about that feeling you have as a parent where you want to get you're having a tough conversation with your kid, and if your first move is to like take control, right? I'm going to take
Yeah.
control of it. And but that's not the right move. Actually, the right move is to kind of surrender and sit down next to the kid, shoulder to shoulder, and open things up. It's the exact same move. Same move when you experience failure. Oh shit, I failed. Well, that's not really the move. Let go of control, surrender to it. What did you learn from it? So we have the same attentional gymnastics all the time, right? That when we know that if we try to double down on control, it's just going to lead us to a bad spot. And we know that if we take time to sort of say, wait a minute, let me surrender here for a minute, and let me open up a little bit, and let me see what's really going on, and let me get in resonance with something else that's bigger than me. That's going to feel really good, and that's going to get me to a better spot. And it's this old wisdom. And now we sort of, we've come to see things like rituals as being superstitious, right?
Yeah.
You know what? You walking out on the Gold Coast is not superstitious. It's really smart, right?
Yeah.
And you taking a minute, like I take a minute when I brush my teeth, and there's a saying that this Harvard Divinity School guy came up with, where he just says to himself every morning, he goes, "Every day contains joy and suffering. Today is no different."
Yeah.
It takes 2 seconds to say, 3 seconds to say. It has an impact. It's a little ritual. It has an impact on the day. And so finding these places where, and what's happening in that ritual is the same thing. You're sort of surrendering control, and you're kind of coming into resonance with something bigger than yourself. And so I that was the move that I think a lot of these flourishing places have, and one that we're uniquely terrible at as modern human
Yeah.
Western people. Just sort of saying, like, kind of going to that ritual space and saying, like, oh, I'm gonna surrender for a minute and see what's really going on.
Well, and by the way, if I choose to go west instead of east, I often end up inside St. Michael's
Oh yeah,
Church.
right, right
It's
on.
right there, and there's
Yeah,
a Buddhist temple across from it too. So it's like and that is why we do those things. That's why theater exists, right?
yeah,
It was a reflection that you can make of the world. Poetry exists as
yep,
a different way to enter that conversation. Um, is baseball your sport?
yeah, yeah. It
Okay.
is. Yeah, well, I have one sitting on my desk, so it must be right.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I mean, I have many. I was a soccer player too, but
mm,
also I'm a Cubs fan, right? So
yeah.
long suffering. Well,
Mm.
you're with the
What?
Guardians, you know. Uh, but you talk about Tito, like, and
Yeah.
you're sort of, so let's talk about that. That you saw a manager of this baseball team who kind of did these things.
He kind of, I mean, he's a Buddha. I mean,
Yeah.
that guy, it's ironic. I've worked with the Guardians for, this is my 13th year. And so I've gotten to see him, and I've gotten to see his successor, Stephen Vogt, who's also absolutely brilliant. Tito, Hall of Fame manager. And the thing that would surprise people about Tito is that he never teaches anybody what to do. Like, if a
Mm.
coach's job is to coach, as far as I know, he has never coached anyone how to throw, how to hit, how to run. He just connects to individuals. He creates a space where his values resonate. Be on time, play the game the right way, never back down from a challenge. Those are his values. And he maintains that space. He's incredibly consistent. He's incredibly connective, and he transmits almost no information. Like it takes everything you think about a leader as being the answer person and flips it on its head, and it works. And most of his teams start out often poorly because everybody's frustrated. It's like, Tito, you should have a meeting. You know, the team isn't playing well. You should have a meeting and tell them what to do. And he never does. He's patient. He lets them self-organize. He waits for the leaders to emerge. He helps nurture that emergence. And damn if it doesn't work. I mean, it's just, it's really something. And these are, it's very old notions, but they're extremely powerful, even in these very competitive environments.
I think Joe Madden has a bit of that too. We had him on the podcast and just talking about that idea of he was setting culture and the playfulness that existed in terms of, dressing in your pajamas or, and at a certain point after they won it and then they didn't win for a couple of years, they started trying to impose, leadership started to impose stuff on him. And it's like, you're taking away the superpower. That's and then right. He goes to the Angels and it's even worse. Right. And then the guy's out of baseball and he's had nothing but success. Yeah. So it's there's an improv concept called follow the follower that kind of works here. And I talk about in my book that we were at the Spertus Institute of Jewish Learning doing some workshops. And this exercise, follow the follower, is where we get, okay, everyone, you're going to do kind of spacewalk in the room. You're going to walk around, but we're going to secretly tell one person they're the leader. And without using language, that person needs to make someone else the leader. Oh. And then so on and so on and so on. And Hal Lewis, who directed the Spertus at the time, turns to me and goes, "You're doing Peter Drucker." And I literally said to him, "Who's Peter Drucker?" and then I learned who Peter Drucker is. And it's just so funny to me too, that because we're talking about all this wisdom, Drucker had all this stuff going on in the 50s and we still everyone said he was a god and didn't listen to it. Right. Still top down. Right. But that is not the way this works. Sometimes I'm the leader. Sometimes you're a leader. Sometimes someone else is the leader.
That's right. That's the beautiful thing about it, right? That's group flow. That's the fun stuff, right? That's where we can define these spaces where we're figuring stuff out together. And that brings aliveness, right? Nobody wants to live in a world where they're just being coerced. We're allergic to coercion. I don't care who you are. We don't like to be coerced. No, creating those spaces like Tito does, like Drucker did, like you did in that exercise, where people can self-organize it's just incredibly powerful and incredibly enlivening.
Isn't it interesting that what we're talking about is both surrender and agency?
Yeah, that's right. And there's almost, I came to think of it as almost like this heartbeat, like this two-part inhale, exhale. Inhale, the surrender is like, I'm going to draw energy from my surroundings. I'm going to connect to what's meaningful around me. And then I'm going to try shit. That's what they do, right? They try stuff to be connected and to do meaningful work together. And think about the word project. Project, like you are literally throwing something in the world. You don't know where it's going to land. The lack of certainty is actually the energy of it. And that's what you need to feel. In the places that I visited, there was huge lack of certainty. They weren't executing plans. They were creating something together. And that's where we find what real flourishing is. It's these moments of group flow where we're self-organizing around obstacles, where we're like a flock of birds moving through the trees together and figuring out what to do, responding to each other. That's what fun is. That's why your world is so, I think, resonant with this stuff, because that's what improv literally is. And the moments that we bring those moments, into our life, whether it's our business life or our home life, are the moments that mean the most. And it's not about to get back to your ladder kind of idea. They're not things that we achieve, because these are moments that we experience, right? These are not, these aren't sort of results. They lead to things. They can often lead to great things. But what we're talking about is creating a landscape where these kind of moments pop up and generate like an ecosystem of moments.
Epley's colleague, Heather Caruso, who was my partner sort of overseeing the Second Science project at UOC with Second City, she was the one who talked to me about the ladder thing. She goes, I prefer the metaphor of like a home. And sometimes you're doing additions, and sometimes you're doing remodels, and
Hmm.
sometimes you move and you're going to move into a smaller home, and sometimes you're going to move into a bigger home, and sometimes you maybe want to be on a houseboat because
Yeah.
that's what's going to be on. And so when you think about it, when you move it to the ground, it doesn't mean you can't scale, but we are not always going to be scaling. We are
Hmm.
sometimes going to be reducing. Again, Letty Klotz subtracting. His whole idea in that first book was we always look to solve problems by adding, but what if we look at subtracting?
Isn't that seems very timely and very right and very ecosystemic, if you will, right?
Yeah,
Like
yeah,
it's
yeah.
not, as Ari Weinswig says, unlimited growth is the model of the cancer cell.
Yeah, wow. Another mic drop. What's you always have a what's next for you, right?
I don't know if I do right now. This flourishing thing, unless I have to write about the afterlife, like I've gone from kind of talent code to culture and now
Yeah.
flourishing. So there's sort of a trilogy happening here. So you'll have to help me figure out what the next one will be. Maybe it's about the afterlife, or this has put me in the space of community. This
Yeah.
all of these places. Flourishing is always mutual. Flourishing is something that you never do alone, and so it's really put me in touch with the power of community, and which of course has pulled me away from doing so much work at my desk and into actually having fun in my community and contributing to it. So that part has been really fulfilling.
I love it. The book is called Flourish, The Art of Building Meaning, Joy, and Fulfillment. Dan Coyle, always great to have you on the pod.
Thanks, Kelly. Enjoyed it.